I am Daron Chatz, visual storyteller and dreamer. One of the things I really love, one of my passions, is interiors. And I can't wait to tell you all about it. It's been a crazy journey for me. And of course, today we're talking about photographing interiors. And just to be 100% clear, I'm going to take you on a journey. I'm going to tell you stories from my perspective. And I'm going to share with you a lot of technical bits and pieces and little hacks that I think will be useful to everyone. This is not a technical photography talk. It's a talk about photographing an interior, no matter who you are and where you come from. So the interesting thing about me is I started my career in film, actually, in the late 80s. I know that's a real long time ago. So I started in feature films in the late 80s. And I was given a really wonderful opportunity to assist a well-known English photographer called Nick Bolton. And basically, that's how my photography career started. So at that point, I had absolutely no idea that I was a photographer waiting to be unleashed. In fact, I was pretty certain I was going to grow through the ranks in the film industry. And I had no idea I was going to be a photographer. Interiors and I fell in love. Simply, it was the sensitivity that connected us, the storytelling, the attention to detail, the connection, the feeling, weaving our senses with our cultures and our memories, the threads and textures of our lives. We now have been in an intimate relationship for around 30 years, so we're doing well. So what I wanted to do is, I did something really interesting. I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years and I've got my own preferences. I've got a lot of tricks. I've got a lot of information and insights to share. But essentially, I Googled the topic. And this is really interesting because, photographing an interior, it's quite a specific search, and the answers are really good, actually. So you don't need me. You can just use this. No, I'm just kidding. No, this was a really interesting thing for me. It was a ton of fun. And just to look at this, and of course, I'll refer to this just now. But actually, just to be 100% clear, that yes, I will teach all of you technical information in this presentation, but really the most important thing is about having fun, because fun shows in the work. And I will now jump into a few technical things. Composition. Composition is super important. Now, just to mention, I'm just going to go back a step, okay? I want to acknowledge that everyone here is from a different environment with a different objective, okay? So I'm going to cover these topics on a basic level and an intermediate level. I'm not going to get too advanced with these topics. If something catches your attention, if you want to know something more about it, please research it. Also, in the 45 minutes, we can't go too in depth. I could speak on the topic of photographing interiors for 2 days solid, to be honest. So this is a really abbreviated version. So here's an interesting thing. I mean, we're all living through a really interesting time because technology is changing, content is changing, communication is changing, platforms are changing. In fact, everything is changing. So the crazy thing is that a lot of people do not know.
I'm on a live podcast. Yeah, what?
A lot of people do not know what this is, basically. So I want to explain it to you. This deals with composition on a level that's affected all of us. So I think if I had to ask you who uses Instagram, I think most of you would say that you do use Instagram, okay? So the interesting thing about Instagram is that Instagram originally launched with a format that looked pretty much like the visual you're looking at. So you're looking at a 1-to-1 square format with a rule of thirds grid on it. So what did they do is they actually put the power in the hands of the consumer to make good compositions. So unbeknownst to the consumer, subconsciously, they were urged to place their horizon lines or their objects on the lines or on the rule of thirds lines, which of course makes for very pleasing compositions. So this is something I wanted to share. And before Instagram did this, This was a very old format used by many old camera brands, but my favorite being Hasselblad. And Hasselblad used a square format with a rule of thirds grid. You could get different grids for your different focusing screens and what have you, but essentially this is something that comes from a long time ago, and it's ingrained in all of us, whether you know it or not. Certain compositions are more pleasing than others. So, and by the way, I'm not much of a keeping to the rules guy, but I do believe that if you're going to break the rules, you should first know them. I think it's incredibly important. So what I wanted to show you here is in terms of composition, okay? We have a real interesting thing here because we've got the golden ratio, we've got the Fibonacci sequence, we've got the rule of thirds, we've got centered symmetry, and we've got leading lines, we've got diagonals, triangles, and many more. All of these shapes can be considered in a composition and can be used strategically to make your composition pleasing. And of course, most importantly, to take your eye on a journey. So that for me is super important. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. First of all, I just want to take you through the mathematics involved here. And that's just a joke, of course. This is not about maths. Okay, so what's okay? I would never try and explain the Fibonacci sequence to you. I'm not capable right now. So just to say that I've now gone to this next slide is about perspective. So I really had the joy, can I say? I didn't realize it at the time, and Stephen will laugh because we were at school together. But when we did woodwork classes, we actually learned technical drawing back in the day. And technical drawing was one of the most important and one of the most beautiful things I ever learned. Of course, I excelled at it at school. I didn't excel at much, to be honest, but I did excel at that. And I was really intrigued by it. And as I was inspired to learn to do it well. And it stuck with me for all these years. And I'm so glad that I did, because essentially perspective lines guide the viewer's eye and bring focus and impact to images. I've shared with you a couple of my images next that I think describe this well. You can see the image on the left. I'd like to think your eye goes to the deck chairs, and then in this nice clean environment, it goes straight through to the horizon. So it takes you on a journey. It takes you on a little adventure. Of course, the symmetry of the right-hand shot, your eye goes directly to the center of the image and then possibly left and right. What I've done is, this is not an interior shot, of course, but I've used another picture of mine to show you how powerful the rule of thirds can be in a composition. Of course, there's a lot of other beautiful things in this picture that help with that. And I'd just like to repeat something to you. The journey of the eye, okay, is the narrative structure of an image. Basically, taking the viewer's eye on a journey is very much what I like to do in all of my pictures. And, you know, I've shot for a lot of different clients. I've shot for various magazines. I've shot for a lot of ad agencies for various brands. I've shot retail catalog work, online work for various local and international brands. You can see the image I'm showing you right here is from a John Lewis catalog, an outdoor catalog from a few years ago. I've used this because, of course, it's got copy on it. It's a tear sheet. But I'd like to think that there's a very specific journey that your eye goes on here too. And for me, my eye goes to the chair on the left. It moves along the table in a diagonal shape. It glances over the objects on the right and then moves in a zigzag down the pathway and into the distance and back again, okay? So this might be a subjective point of view, but the point is there are common effects and there are common techniques, and I'm sure they don't apply to everyone. Your eye might do what I'm saying and it might not, but I like to think that that we do this. We are very considerate of this when we're shooting. So here I've used some really, if I could say, the two images on the left are retail images. I've referred to retail images a lot in this presentation because I pride myself in the fact that we don't only shoot beautiful editorial imagery, we make product focus retail imagery as beautiful as it can be too. So we care passionately and intimately about everything that we shoot. I speak about us collectively because it is teamwork, guys. I might be the photographer, but there are creatives and art directors and stylists and all sorts of people, lighting teams and all sorts of people involved in making these pictures come to life. So yeah, we go into the journey of the eye again. And if you look at the center image, I've actually used what I believe to be no harm to anyone in the buyers of the product, but quite a mundane example of a picture, because yeah, we're selling some crockery, okay? So what I'd like to think here is that in this image, I'd like to say that I believe this is a really beautiful composition. And the stylist and art director that I worked with on this are extremely talented. And the three of us, experienced people, are on set creating a wonderful composition from the crockery, which is very important for me to say. And I think you can see the journey of the eye. My eye starts at the berries and goes up the bottom crockery and then to the top shelf and along the top crockery. I'm not sure what your eye does. On the left-hand image, it very much starts in the foreground and zigzags to the linen, the laundry bin and the bath and then the gown and stuff on the right. So zigzags, I will come back to. Very, very important. What I'd like to do is I'd like to point something out to you, because essentially visual language, okay, is a very strong tool, and composition is a very strong element in terms of visual language. Yes, we've got lighting, coloration, we've got styling, and in film we've got art direction and production design and all those good things, a color psychology and lighting and all sorts of things, lensing, and all these things give you a look and feel, let's say. But what we're talking about here is a very specific visual language that's used over and over by this person. And this is a filmmaker, and I'm pretty sure if all of you weren't on mute, you'd be telling me who it was. And it's Wes Anderson, of course. And Wes Anderson is a really great example. And I've drawn his references here because he's referred to so often in terms of his visual language. So yeah, we have composition playing a really important role in his language. So another important thing to take into account in composition is the idea of straight lines. And what I've done here is I've pulled up two of my images. Both of these are hospitality images from the one and only in Cape Town. The idea here is that these are shot using these lines to the vanishing point and keeping the vertical and horizontal lines straight, pretty perfectly straight. And I'll come to this just now because you can also achieve this. We do this in post a lot, guys. Like these days, most of the straightening up happens in post because sometimes you can't be in the center of the room. Sometimes being in the middle with your lens doesn't work. You want to lift your lens up a bit to see the top surface of the sofa, the top surface of the bed. You maybe don't want to be exactly in the middle of the room and square on with your camera. So what happens is firstly, the first example I made is you can't be in the middle. So if you have to shoot from the side, obviously all your lines are skewed. These days you can correct that in post. Also, if you have to lift up, or if you're shooting from low and you've got perspective happening like this or like that, you can correct it in post, okay? In the old days, when we used 4 or 5 cameras, other medium format cameras with bellows, with tilt and shift facilities or tilt and shift lenses, we used to move the film plane in order to correct the parallels. It was a little more complicated than these days. Things have become a lot easier, if I can say that. I'd like to move on because, of course, we only have 45 minutes. So there's my 2 cents on composition, okay? I will refer more to composition throughout my presentation because I'll be showing you a lot of other references. I'd like to move on to format next. As I said, we're all living through a really interesting time, and format is really confusing. And I've got a very strong point of view about format because, here we go. Of course, television used to be 4:3, so did some images. 3:2 is the actual aspect ratio of most DSLRs and now mirrorless cameras. 16:9 is of course the new film aspect ratio, and 9:16, which I'll come to in a minute, is actually basically it's portrait shape on social media. So here's an example. You'll see here, what I've done is I've addressed format in a way that, I'm going to express to you what I believe makes sense. On the bottom here, you've got an image that's sitting obviously horizontal on a portrait format. So this would, you've seen this a lot, obviously. Someone posts on Instagram and they put their picture this way around. The other way around, 9:16, is if you had posted your picture sideways, right? And the other way, 9:16 of the picture the right way around, I believe is not a pleasing crop in this instance. It's not bad, but it doesn't show the space very well, okay? And I see a lot of this happening out there. And I've got a really strong feeling about it. I believe that this will not carry on, because I believe that, well, first of all, I believe two things. I believe that I think that people should be, excuse my typo there, see a full screen. I believe that people should be inspired to turn their phone around. And I myself have started posting content sideways, and people do turn their phones around. Because this whole thing happened when people started shooting portrait videos on their mobile phones, okay? So all the people in charge of the various social media platforms saw that people were using their phones in a portrait shape, let's say, and they designed everything to work for portrait shaped videos. But guess what? Portrait videos and portrait pictures don't make sense in a lot of situations, because portrait shape is for portraits and landscape shape is for landscapes. It's very logical, because the shape of rooms, I'm just going to go back a bit. The shape of a room, sorry, there you go, is landscape. It's not portrait, you know, and the same applies to a landscape. So I just think it's a logical thing. I'll make another call. I'll say that televisions will more than likely start rotating. You'll be able to rotate your screen from horizontal to portrait, depending on what sort of content you're watching, because I don't think portrait content is going to end quickly, but quite logically, it doesn't make sense, and I don't think it has longevity. That's my 2 cents worth on formats. Now, platforms is a whole different conversation. Of course, print used to be a big thing. If I can say that print is dying, unfortunately, even the large catalogs that I normally make most of my living out of shooting abroad are turning into lesser shoots that are online or electronic content focused. I love shooting books. I've got a passion for it. My entire career was about narrative through pagination and shooting with the very best magazines and having fun, shooting magazine editorials, balancing those with advertising. The retail world, the advertising world, it's a whole different story. So if I could say that I do miss print, I love paper. So next I'm going to move on to lighting. So lighting is a really important topic, of course. And I understand everyone is in a different position here. You might be in a position where you are not bringing in artificial lighting, and you might be in a position where you are bringing in artificial lighting, but needless to say, you can still have absolute control of your lighting. And this is a really big topic for me. What I've done here is I've taken an image that I shot years ago with Kathy O'Cleary, for those of you who know her. And what I've done is I've outlined the aspects of this image that are crucial to me or extremely important. When I light any interior, I do not light from behind the camera. Very, very important for me to mention to you. This is subjective, but I do not do that, because what I love is I love the way a side light creates a sensitivity, and it creates texture, and it connects with me on a visceral level. It basically is an emotional thing to me, texture and mood. And when you create texture and mood in your imagery, it connects with the viewer better. And that is why I'm so passionate about it. I just love the feeling. And when I have a more flat looking image, when I have the light coming from behind the camera, it doesn't please me. So honestly, I never light from behind the camera. So you might ask, how do you do this in a room? Well, often if I'm standing in a bedroom, in different situations and I'm trying to shoot the bed or the bedroom, and I have a window behind me, I close the curtains basically. And then all of a sudden you have different types of light taking place. And this is something that everybody should try. You should essentially, if you have a window behind you, try close the curtains. And by the way, if you have a window to the side of you and it has sheer curtains on, try diffuse the light with some sheer curtains, because that's a really beautiful and sensitive way to light any interior. So I'm using these simple examples in case you land up shooting an interior or shooting a project and you're not a photographer. So what we're doing here is we identifying the elements which are super important to me. So I'm going to start at the bottom and I'm going to say that negative, shadow, gives form and mood. This is extremely important to me. Going up one, what I've done is I've used hard enough light to create texture. So the light is not so soft that there's no texture. There is in fact beautiful texture on the fabric and on the other objects. And then what I've done is, if you look at the vase, I've repeated the picture on the right there because my funny little dots and lines might be covering it. But if you look on the right-hand side at that reflection on the vase, the attention to detail required to do this properly is quite intense. Because when we're shooting something like this, I'm looking at every single little reflection and every single little detail. And I'm very purposefully controlling it or not controlling it, with the intention of it feeling completely natural and not overly manipulated. So that is really the art of shooting interiors. It's to pay immense attention to detail so that the image feels relaxed and natural and not fussed with. And styling is very similar. And I'm going to get on to styling just now, but I'm not a stylist, but I do have my view about styling, of course. And so you can see that on this vase, there's a large light source. Okay, very important. I don't like little zingy highlights from hard light sources, especially on glossy objects. They very rarely work for me. Often if I'm shooting glass, I might add a little bit of a zing in with mostly soft light, and I'll mix the two qualities of light to get what I want. And then of course, to the top, we're talking soft light quality and soft shadows. So that comes very much by changing the quality of light. Could be that the light is bouncing off something before it comes through the window, or it could be that you're closing the sheer curtains, or you're hanging up a piece of voile or something else that softens the light. We use silks and scrims and all sorts of techniques in this industry, but of course, depending on where you are at and what you're doing, you can use your own way of doing it. In the past, I've diffused light with bubble wrap too. Multiple layers of bubble wrap that everyone has on set, because that's what the furniture comes in. So I've given a couple of other examples here of how beautiful a side light can be. I think these display the very same qualities, the negative, the mood, the emotion. These are retail shots, guys. As I've said, I've referred a lot to my catalog and retail work because I believe that that speaks for itself, because these are not open, brief, creative, fun shoots with no retail client to please. These are retail shots where we are pushing the bounds of storytelling, and we're pushing the bounds of feeling and creativity whilst having a very clear retail objective. So this leads me to another point about lighting, a very good point, which is lights on or off. And this is very subjective, and I'm going to talk into it in that way, because basically it's not like I have a specific standpoint. Lights must be on or must be off all of the time. This varies depending on where we are. This is Nobu Restaurant at One and Only in Cape Town. This was very complicated to shoot. I shot this at night, and it's a very big space to light. So I multi-flashed or painted with light. I created the light through the windows in the night, so there was no light. I wanted the windows to be glowing, so we still had the natural glow coming from outside. And I balanced this with all of the interior lighting to give it a romantic mood that had still a feeling of freshness from that daylight or the window side light, okay? So in this instance, a balance of daylight and the domestic lights, or the practical lights as we call them, made a lot of sense. I believe it worked really well. Okay, here's another example for you. What I've done here is I've shown you the image on the right. I believe a balance worked incredibly well again. Balancing these lights is sometimes more complicated than it seems. Sometimes certain ambient lights are too bright, or the candles are not bright enough, and the window seems too bright. So balancing it can be a little tricky, getting the feeling you're after, but I've used this example. This was shot in the UAE. I'm sure you can see the styling speaks into that, or it could have been a very Arabic looking shot from India. I'm not sure, but anyway, I can't remember 100%. But anyway, what you can see is mood wise. It's lovely because you've got these hanging lanterns and these other candles in the shots, and you've got the window on the left, of course. Now the image on the very left, what I've done is I have definitely left the light off. Now, this is a really great example because I think generally my general rule of thumb is if it's a crisp looking daylight shot, if it's a really fresh looking shot, why would you have a light on? So I think I don't like it when in all the stories I tell, all the visual stories I tell, I don't like the viewer to wonder why something is happening. And to me, the image on the left feels really natural with the light off, like it looks like the morning. And if it were the daytime or the morning, I wouldn't have the light on. So I elect to have it off, and it feels great to me. What I've done here, these are more hospitality shots from Conrad Hotels. And what I've done here is I've shown you why and how these lights are important too. Because in this instance, yes, it's daylight, and you can see the image on the right even shows a little bit of the daylight out the window. There's a fire too. But basically the light here sets a mood, it sets a little bit of romance, and it also helps to lead your eye into the picture. That's why the light is so important. If you look at the image on the left, if that standing lamp behind the chaise was not on, I don't think your eye would go there, to be honest. So it leads your eye into the picture really nicely. So this is my view on lights on or lights off. I believe that it needs to make sense, just to reiterate, and I believe it needs to be purposeful. I believe the gesture should help the image. If it doesn't help the image and it doesn't make sense with the mood, don't do it. I'll just quickly have a sip of this. Thanks. Okay, good. So now we are talking interesting angles. I've brought this up as a topic because it's very brief, but what I want to say is one should always look for interesting angles. Because at the bottom here, you've got a quite, on the left, you've got a quite standard image of the same space. It still works really well. It's got very strong vanishing point lines. It's got very strong composition. It's got good balance, I believe. And your eye goes on a great journey. But in conjunction with that, I shot the image from the top, which I believe has a whole nother feel to it. Aside from the mirror, and it's shot at a very similar time of day, by the way, aside from the mirror reflection and the featuring of the light in the foreground, you also get a beautiful play of the daylight, and it's a really pleasing composition and angle to me. It's an unexpected angle that takes me on a journey as the viewer, and I like that when I'm looking at pictures. I like that I go on a journey and that I see different perspectives. And this shot, shot on the right here, I guess, mainly speaks into that. And it does exactly the same thing for me. It basically helps me to tell an interesting story. And it opens up, it shows me architectural elements, and it introduces the space to me in a way that's functional and lifestyle. And I believe it really works. It works hard in this image. The fact that it's a very different angle. I think that's a super important topic for me, and I would always look for that. Even if you're shooting furniture, you should look at it from all angles, and you should try to find the really interesting angles that really talk to you. And I'm sure a lot of people that are listening will do that, because you're all creatives and designers and the like. So moving on from there, I'd like to talk into the topic of lensing and depth of field. This is quite a technical topic, but I'm not going to be technical in my explanation, as I said, not too technical. Please forgive me, whoever's image this is. I got it off Google. It's a random image, and I don't know who the author is. And I've just used it as a good example of how a wide lens doesn't work in a room. And I'm going to talk about this before I show you some comparisons. What you often find is, I don't want to point a finger at any one particular person here, and this is really just my point of view, so it's not a personal criticism, but often you find in real estate, in the real estate industry, and often in interiors, you will find people using really wide lenses to try and show off spaces. Now, this space we're looking at, this is not even a small room, it's a really big room, and it's still shot on a lens that's too wide. And what that has done for us is it's distorted the foreground objects and it's made them larger than life. And of course, if you look towards, it's made the foot of the bed really big. And if you look towards the headboard and the cushions, which should be a point of focus for the bed, that's the luxurious part of the shot. It's made it really distant and it's made it much less impactful. So what I've done here is I've used an example, I've cropped in for a start. So I'm going to just show you these two images again. If you look back at this image, right, even if you crop in, can you see that it still doesn't feel great? So it's not about cropping in. It's about the perspective that the lens has given us, which you can't change in post. There's literally no way of changing that. So the answer is not to shoot on wide lenses, in my opinion. The image on the right is a catalog image I shot of a bed. And this is shot, in my opinion, from a similar angle. Obviously, I'm a little lower, but it's showing you how much more impactful the longer lens is. Can you see how much bigger the cushions on the back seem and how much smaller the foot of the bed seems and how the whole image is condensed in a way and it invites you in. It does not create a distorted perspective that's hard to consume or to enjoy. I believe that the image on the right is far more palatable. Here I've used a few more examples. These are all portrait shapes. A lot of them are catalog images. And just to be clear, on catalog and editorial, we've still been shooting portraits, obviously for full page sakes and squared off imagery. We've also been shooting double page spreads, which are landscape, of course. But portrait shape and landscape shape in combination is not new, of course, in photography. I just referred to it in terms of the electronic and social media formats just now as a concern. Because I don't believe, sometimes when we're shooting a catalog, you have a shortage of pages, if I could explain it like that. And that forces us to shoot portrait shape beds, which is never great. Shooting a portrait shape room is very, very difficult. And I've used quite tame examples here. Sometimes we're trying to get huge big chests of drawers and cupboards and nightstands and all sorts of things into a portrait shape shot, which is almost impossible. And it's a real struggle and you always land up suffering in some way. But I've put these up as examples of compositions that I believe work. And this is the type of focal length. If you can see, of course, we vary focal length when we're shooting, particularly if you're doing one shoot, you need to vary your focal length so that there's a rhythm to the pagination or to the sequence of images that is pleasing. So things change from wide to close up to mid, and we need to vary angles. When you're shooting many, many beds, you need to vary the angles so that you don't see the bed at the same angle over and over and over, of course. But I think these three images in conjunction actually showcase the focal length and the lensing that I was talking to you about. Now, I'm just going to quickly flick to this image. I think that's another really great example for you. You can see that if I had gone on a wider lens there, the foreground table and the chair to the right would be humongous. And the background sofa, which is actually the point of focus, would be much smaller, if you can imagine that, as I explained the bed example to you. So you can see that the feeling, this is the type of lensing and the type of composition that is pleasing and that I believe is the way to go. So if your image feels similar to this, you're going in the right direction. That is my point of view. No wider than this. And I can't tell you the exact focal length of this, but what I can tell you is I very rarely go wider than a 35mm lens on any interior. I'm mostly sitting at about between 35 and 50mm, if that means anything to you guys. It's interesting because, you know, if you're not a photographer and you're using your phone, let's say, to photograph, I do have a section coming up shortly about photographing on your mobile phone. And I would like to build on that because I think it's a really important thing to speak about in a few minutes. But basically, just to switch over from this to depth of field for a minute, I do not want to go into too much detail about depth of field either. And this is not about shutter speeds and apertures and all that complicated stuff that you might not understand. But in simple terms, limited depth of field means that your image is in focus or sharp in one place, and then it's out of focus in the rest of the picture. And if you do know photography, you can obviously see that when your lens is wide open at 2.8 or 2 or 1.4 or 1.2, whatever lens you have, you've got a very limited depth of field. It's a shallow depth of field. And when you increase your aperture, you can see the whole image in focus. And this is the perfect intro to the very next topic, because using a tripod is incredibly important. And that is because tripods help you. If you're using a DSLR or you're using a mirrorless camera or something with manual settings, right, you must use a tripod for interiors, because a tripod allows you to do long exposures and keep everything in focus, obviously. So I'll get to that in a minute, the motion blur thing. But you can imagine that if you try to do a long exposure with a camera in your hand, it
annoyed me that it was so inefficiently done by hand. So
okay, so basically, I've put these other little gadgets on the right-hand side because you can use a tripod on your fancy DSLR or mirrorless camera, but you can also put your mobile phone on a tripod. And I think this is something really worth considering to people that are wanting to photograph with their mobile phones. Mobile phone photography is pretty awesome these days. You should go into your settings. You should make sure they're set up to shoot at the highest possible res. You should learn how to shoot on your mobile phone. There's a ton of settings in there, and I'll come to it in a minute. But you can use mobile phone photography for a lot of things these days. Not for print, of course, but it can be used for a lot of things. And I'm a professional, as you all know, and I'm saying this to you because really a lot of rules can be broken these days and things are crazy different. So I mentioned motion blur to you. So this is a good example of motion blur with the locked off camera. I shot this with a tripod, of course, with quite a long exposure. That was a train racing past me, okay? In the interiors context, these are a couple images of mine. I think you've all seen things like this a million times. It was in vogue years ago, especially with L decoration. It was part of their visual style. We used to have people wafting through the frame quite often at a slow shutter speed. Beautiful. You don't have to pay any artist fees for usage if you blur your subject. I'm just joking, of course. We don't do it for that reason, but it has been done for that reason in the past. But essentially, it gives you a really lovely feeling of motion, and you can't achieve this without locking your camera off on a tripod, of course. So you can use depth of field. I mean, not depth of field, sorry. You can use motion blur creatively, and you can use depth of field creatively. And you can only start to do that by getting into the manual settings of your camera and deciding on why and how you want to do something and using the manual settings to support that or to help you express that. So moving on to smartphones. Okay, so this is a really big topic because I already mentioned to you that they are crazy tools, okay? A smartphone, I mean, I use my smartphone. I'm talking about using it to capture images, potentially of products, potentially of interiors, and actually using these images. I don't use my mobile phone, obviously, for the images I use, but one can, okay? And I use mine, however, to shoot reference angles. I've got an app that's got different lenses for different formats. So I can find my lens with my phone for any particular shot I want. I mean, at this stage in my career, I can guess which lens I want, and I'm normally right. But sometimes I use the app just to make 100% sure. I also use an app to follow the sun path so that I can see exactly what the sun is going to be doing at any particular time in the day. I use a virtual sun app. I use Helios, and I can see exactly where the sun will be. Like if I'm wrecking a location, or we're planning a catalog shoot to set up a certain bed somewhere, and I want the light to come from a certain direction, and we're all under, a time pressure, and the schedule doesn't allow for us to wait for the sun for a few hours. So I've got to get it right. And I use these tools. I use my mobile phone as a tool to help me get it right. So it's really exciting. But in this instance, I've gone and I've shot a couple of pictures with my phone, just to show you a couple nifty tricks. And the first nifty trick I want to show you is the fact that I've now stood in one place and I've taken this first image, okay? Then I've stood in the exact same place and taken that image, right? These are not treated whatsoever. I haven't even treated the look and feel. I haven't fixed the parallels. I haven't done anything. I'm going to flick between those again. Here's the first image, shot on my iPhone. Here's the second image, shot on my iPhone. So one would ask, how did I do that? And you might know the answer. What I've done is I was holding my phone landscape, okay, on the first image, and I was shooting like that. And on the second image, I turned my phone around and I used the panoramic feature to go a little wider. So this is a really big hack, and I don't mind sharing these findings with everyone, because I'm not sure if anyone else has thought of this. But if you're in a room and you need a slightly wider shot and you've only got your mobile phone, you can use this technique. So the important thing about that is that what you're looking at here is not a wider lens. Look at this picture, look at that picture, look at this picture, look at that picture. It is not more distorted. You might see a slight curve here and there, which can be fixed quite easily, by the way, in Photoshop. You can use the liquify tool in Photoshop to fix the little tweaks there that have gone a bit bendy. But essentially, on your phone, what you have is, I've just taken a little frame grab on the left there while I was fixing the parallels, okay? So all I did is this on my iPhone. Look what a difference the vertical parallel lines make. So if you look at that image on the right, look as I flick between it, what a difference that makes. Just straightening those lines up a little. And that's done right on the iPhone, of course. And you can do that obviously with the vertical lines, with the horizontal lines, and that's just on the phone. On the phone, you've also got massive capabilities to lift the shadows, change the color temperature, drop the highlights, and treat the colors. I mean, there's a massive amount of flexibility there. And I think that it's something that shouldn't be sniffed at or overlooked. I think you could achieve a lot on your phone. And I'd like to bring those of you who don't have DSLRs and mirrorless cameras and you want to get really good pictures and you want to try with your mobile phones, I'd be really intrigued to see what you actually get with those, what sort of results you get. And I hope you can use some of the tips I've shown you. I know for one, that panoramic one is a really goodie. I've used it a lot. Even when I was shooting pictures of my house to rent it out on Airbnb and stuff like that, I actually used my phone and I used that trick a lot. So now I'm going to move on to another topic, which is styling. Excuse me, fiddling with my screen there. I need a good composition. Okay, so styling is a big topic. So before I even start, I want to say this to everyone. The pictures that I have shot over the last 30 years, the pictures that are in my portfolio, the pictures that are in the books I've shot and the magazines that have been published, they would never be as good as they are without a stylist. So my hat's off to the stylists I've worked with. I'm not going to name all of them, but you all know who you are if any of you are watching this. And I've worked with possibly some of the best stylists and art directors and designers in the world. And it's been a great honor to work with them. And as I'm saying to you, often stylists are not acknowledged properly. You know, I've got to say that as a photographer, even in the past, you know, when things were published in other countries, the photographer got usage, you know, for all these things that were published, and the stylists never got much or never got anything. And I think it's a damn shame, because stylists are so important. And I'm not one of those photographers that loves to style on my own. And I have nothing against photographers who love to style on their own. There are a lot of them out there, and that is their offering. They style and shoot. Yes, I can style, but I choose not to. And I'm not a great stylist because I don't focus on it, and I don't underestimate how much a stylist can bring to the party. I'm going to show you some extreme examples. I've picked the most challenging pictures, some of the most challenging pictures I've ever had to take to show you. So you can see the image, both of these images have about 1 million colorways in them. And I believe that working with the stylist and the art director, once again, in both of these images, we have actually achieved quite a magical effect. And like the image on the left has so much product in it, right? It is crazy. I don't know how many SKUs that is, but my God, it's a lot. And it's got a lot of colorways in it. And one would never pick all of those colorways to live together, yet it lives together really stylishly, in my opinion. Also, you can see the mood helps, the composition helps, the concept helps of the shelves and the alcove, and it all helps, right? Together, I believe it achieves something really special. And then what we do is we, well, the one on the right is not dissimilar. I think that's really good styling. And yeah, hats off to these guys, the guys I've worked with to pull that off. I've given you a few more examples. You know, the general rule of thumb with styling, of course, this layout looks a little busy because there's quite a few images, yeah? But the general rule of thumb, if I could give anyone advice about styling, right? Aside from using a stylist, I'd say second is take things out of the frame. Because when things are too cluttered, your eye doesn't know where to go. So I think there's a few really good examples of that, yeah? I think your eye knows where to go in all of these pictures. None of them feel too busy, and they all communicate just what we want them to. I think these images do the very same thing. I think they're nice and clean. They are single-minded, and we're not trying to do too much in one go. Okay, I'm going to jump on to room sets. I'm showing this as an example again, because of course we built this room. It doesn't exist. It's a couple of flats and a fake window and some flooring. And this is a really interesting thing, because shooting catalogs, you do this a lot. Of course, when we're shooting editorial and in advertising work, we also do it, of course. But when we're shooting catalog, you can't really travel from location to location. So it makes the most sense to pick a location that has a little bit of architecture sometimes, or just to build the architecture yourselves, of course. Here's a couple more examples of that. The image on the left, the bathroom doesn't exist. That's a flat with some doors, some flooring, a bath, and a lighting stand with a shower curtain on it. So it's just important to point out that this is how this works essentially, is we create these room sets. We create these room sets. I've worked with teams to create hundreds of room sets over the years, some of them grand and some of them more simple, okay? But generally it's always a bit of a thing, a bit of an effort. And what I've done here is I've introduced this. I'm showing you a group shot of our whole team, one of our teams on a shoot that we did, just to show you this is not even a big team, guys. And this is the team on the catalog shoot, okay? So sometimes there's up to 200 of us working together for 3 weeks to finish a catalog. 2 photography teams, 2 stylists, or sometimes 3 photographers, 3 stylists, 3 art directors, and a couple hundred people. You know, it's a really big thing, building all these things. We've got set building departments, lighting departments, visual merchandising departments, transport departments. You can just imagine. So yeah, I wanted to show you some behind the scenes pictures for fun. This is me at the top of the ladder, which I'm often at the top of a ladder. Luckily, I'm not scared of heights. And on the right, I love this one because the set building guys actually built me that ladder in India. And they keep it for me every time I go back. The special long ladder that they made for me out of wood, which I absolutely love. And you can see that there's no shortage of hands. You can see on the left there, we're planning the composition. to hang those pictures. And we've got a lot of people in there. On the right-hand side, it's just a wide shot to show you how large these actual spaces are and how much production goes into this. We sometimes set up three rooms in the same space, and we plan the sun path, the lighting direction, the camera angles and what have you, so that it all works. And sometimes it doesn't work so well. So you'll see on the right-hand side there, that's Warren Heath, another well-known South African photographer. Him and I often shoot catalogs together around the world. And that's him and I basically back-to-back shooting in different directions with our cameras nearly on top of each other, which is quite funny. And on the left, you can see that all of the spaces are so full of props that they've started cascading the props down these stairs, which is really funny. This is a really great behind the scenes perspective, I think, too, because it shows you how we plan the pagination, the rhythm of a book when we're shooting it. I believe books and electronic is the same. One should definitely look at, what are you doing page to page or image to image? And is it telling a great story? Is that range of weighting, of composition, of focal length, is it all in place to give us nice movement and progression? Okay, now I'm going to move on to post-production. So post-production is a really big thing because, I mean, I retouch quite a lot. I love it. I'm capable. I, of course, do collaborate with a lot of people, and I'm about to show you some work from Jade Holing, who's a really good Photoshop wizard, I'll call him. And he's basically my favorite, and I use him often. I'm a little shout out to him because he gave me these images to show you all. And we've built a relationship over a really long time. So I can retouch, I can composite, I often clean things up myself, but I'm also often shooting back to back to back for weeks and weeks and weeks, and I don't have the time. I lose enough sleep just trying to process my images, let alone retouch them, okay? Obviously, one can do a hell of a lot with post. So this is a really lovely example that he's given us, because what you can see here is he's taken 4 different elements, okay? He's taken the woman on the sofa, he's taken 3 different background elements, and he has combined it into that. So I think that this is really breathtaking, actually, because I'm not judging the exact furniture or the performance or the lighting. I'm just looking at the compositing here, and we've done similar things together, but I didn't have a piece of furniture to show all of you right now or something interior related. So I've used his to show you all, okay? So I'm gonna go back a minute. He's used those elements to create that. So I think that's pretty breathtaking. And it opens up a lot of opportunities for people, because you have got to know that you can use stock imagery, you can shoot backgrounds, you can conceptualize with this thinking, and this can be done so that it looks 100% natural. So excuse me jumping into another category. I wanted to show you a couple of other examples, because these are cars, of course. I'm going to show you 2 car shots. I did these with Jade too. In this situation, this is a real car photographed separately from the environment. We bought the background image, it's a stock image, and we comped the car in, but this is a life-size car. This is something altogether different and extremely exciting if you're a designer, because this is a miniature car. It is about this large, and that's a stock image in the background. I used a very specific technique to make this feel so real, but I'm not going to go into that too much now. But the exciting thing about this is that it brings me to the point of scale. And I remember years ago, I did a shoot with Anna-Marie Menkes. For those of you who know her, she's absolutely fabulous. And I shot miniature furniture with her years ago. And I have no idea where those pictures are to date. In fact, on that topic, probably 80% of the images I've ever shot in my life are gone, because in the old days, we used to shoot on film, of course, and none of that was archived properly. So it's all history. But these days, of course, we've got multiple copies and cupboards full of hard drives. So I don't know what will happen with all of those. But yes, I don't have the miniature furniture, but this opens up a lot of opportunities. And I'll come back to that in a minute. I want to just, actually, let me skip to this slide and just say, if you look at objects like this, you cannot tell what size they are. So think of those possibilities. you can essentially take a miniature prototype, you can photograph it, and you can put it into a real environment really easily, okay? I'm showing you this example. This is not my image. This is one of the images that Jade has worked on. This is photographed in a showroom, and this is a fake house environment that has been created in Photoshop around the furniture, okay? So there's nothing real about, I mean, this is not real, but it looks pretty real. And of course, that is a creative thing too. I mean, the shadows can be worked on and the textures can be worked on. And there's all this latitude or all this opportunity in post to actually push things, you know, to whatever level pleases you. But I think this is a really good example of how you can go from a showroom into another environment just like that. And I think you should open your minds. People should open your minds to the possibility that all these things are possible now, and it's become a lot easier to do things that look fantastic and real. Okay, here's another car, which is maybe strange, but this one has more context. I shot this many years ago for L Decoration. It was a project that we did in collaboration with Tonic Design and Lexus. And you may ask, where was Tonic involved? And I'll tell you in a minute. Okay, so at the top of the frame, this was a really beautiful job, by the way, because I was given a real open brief to do something creative with a piece of furniture and a car. So you'll see that at the top, the tubular shapes that are hanging into the frame are actually Tonic's piece of furniture repeated. So they become just a design element and they kind of work into the space, you know. And the car lives in that space too. So the reason I'm pointing this out as well is to talk into this topic of scale, because they have blown the furniture out of scale proportion, and I think it looks really wonderful, in my opinion. So moving along, I would like to say that it's been a hell of a journey so far, and I am incredibly grateful, and I've had a ton of fun. I'm talking about my journey through interior photography, and I know this has just been an overview and it's just touched on a few things, but I really do feel that I have the best job in the world, and I absolutely love what I do. And I think those of you who know me, those who have worked with me, will know that I'm passionate about every single thing that I do. And I believe that those elements are super key. I can tell you about composition and lensing and depth of field and lighting and styling and all these different things. But at the end of the day, it's about the love and the passion, and it's about having fun. And that is what I do. And that is what I'm so very grateful for. And thank you all for joining.